What if, somewhere out there, millions of light years away, there's someone who looks exactly like you, thinks like you, but just decided not to watch this video? I used to laugh when a friend brought up parallel universes. It sounded like a cheesy plot from some low-budget 80s sci-fi movie airing at 2 a.m. But then I started to realize, some of the world's top physicists, from Stephen Hawking to Michio Kaku, not only didn't dismiss the idea, they were actively trying to prove it could be real. And that's when I couldn't sit still anymore. As an American, I was raised in a culture that values freedom, the pursuit of truth, and the courage to question everything we're told is obvious. So when I heard there might be a chance that I'm not the only version of myself, living in the only version of reality, I knew I had to dig deeper, not because I believe in weird stuff, but because, if there's even a 1% chance that every small decision I make, like choosing coffee over tea this morning, could create a different version of me in another universe, then that's big enough to matter to the entire world. I started collecting research, talking to scientists, interviewing people who claimed they'd seen themselves somewhere else, and traveling to places rumored to be intersections between realities. What I discovered was a door. Not a door made of wood or metal, but an idea, possibility, and maybe you've stood before that door too. You just didn't recognize it. My name is James Walker. I was born in Montana, where the night skies are dark enough to see the Milky Way with your own eyes, and wide enough to sit for hours just thinking about the universe. I'm not a physicist. I'm not a writer. I used to be an aerospace engineer, 18 years working for a private aircraft manufacturer in Dallas, Texas. My life revolved around things that could be measured: thrust, speed, altitude, and numbers precise down to the decimal point. But everything changed after a car accident. It wasn't severe enough to kill me, but in the few seconds when my car veered off I-90 and flipped into a ditch, I felt something strange. Like everything around me paused, and then trembled slightly. It was like I was slipping off something. And when I woke up in the hospital, a weird feeling wouldn't leave me. Like I was living in a world that was just off. Sounds crazy, I know. But after that, I started noticing little things. Tiny things that weren't right. A close friend swore we never went to college together, even though I still had a photo of us standing outside the engineering building in 2001. A song I knew by heart since high school suddenly had completely different lyrics when I looked it up online. And then there was the time I accidentally called someone Sophia. Even though she clearly said her name was Sophie, everyone laughed it off. But I couldn't let it go. I started writing things down, investigating, comparing, talking to people who had felt that same sensation of slipping out of reality. The question slowly formed: if parallel universes exist simultaneously, is it possible that we can slide from one to another without even knowing? And if so, why did it happen to me? As I began to seriously explore the theory of parallel universes, what surprised me most wasn't some fringe blog post or a flashy YouTube video. It was that real scientists were seriously discussing it. A 2019 report from MIT proposed the many worlds hypothesis as a natural extension of quantum mechanics. Hugh Everett, an American physicist, introduced the theory back in the 1950s. And although his ideas were once considered insane, today, leading research institutions, from Caltech to Princeton, are revisiting them with surprising respect. Which made me ask the bigger question: if the theory of parallel universes is slowly gaining scientific legitimacy, why haven't most of us heard about it in any serious way? I began to wonder, maybe not everyone wants you to know. Just like how governments once hid information about top-secret military projects during the Cold War, or how tech corporations keep breakthroughs in AI under wraps. Maybe, just maybe, there are organizations, governments, or powerful groups intentionally keeping the multiverse theory in the shadows. Because if it's true, everything we know about identity, free will, even the law would have to be rewritten. Imagine this: if there's another version of me, James Walker, living in a universe where 9/11 never happened, where the president in 2025 is someone else, and where I chose to become a musician instead of an aerospace engineer, that would mean every decision I make here isn't as certain as I thought. I know I'm not the only one who's felt this. From the Mandela effect to mysterious disappearances reported everywhere from Nevada to Alaska, many Americans have shared stories of feeling like they're not in the right reality. This isn't just science fiction anymore. It's a door that's slowly creaking open. And the real question is, are we ready to step through it? To understand the theory of parallel universes, and why it's slowly moving from science fiction into the polished halls of empirical science, we need to go back nearly a century, to the moment humans first began to suspect the universe might be more complicated than what our eyes can see. This story doesn't begin with people who believe in extra dimensions or aliens. It begins with math, with quantum mechanics. Back in the 1920s, in a small room in Germany, a group of physicists, including Werner Heisenberg, Niels Bohr, and Erwin Schrödinger, laid the groundwork for an entirely new theory of the subatomic world. On a scale so small it's almost unimaginable, particles like electrons and photons don't behave like rolling marbles on a table. Instead, they can exist in multiple states at once, a phenomenon called quantum superposition. You've heard of Schrödinger's cat, right? In that thought experiment, the cat is both alive and dead at the same time, until someone opens the box and forces reality to pick one outcome. This raises a question that has haunted scientists for decades. If multiple possibilities can occur simultaneously, then what happens to the ones that aren't chosen? The first answer, also the most controversial, came from a Princeton PhD student named Hugh Everett III, back in 1957. He didn't just suggest that the other possibilities still exist. He claimed that every decision leads to its own separate branch of reality. In other words, every time you flip a coin, the universe splits in two, one where the result is heads, and one where it's tails. Everett's idea was dismissed for decades. Niels Bohr, the father of the modern atomic model, called it a romanticized abstraction with no experimental basis. But as time passed, and scientists developed the technology to examine particles on the smallest scales, more and more unexplainable phenomena began to surface, pushing Everett's theory back into the academic spotlight. By the 1990s, with the rise of quantum cosmology, the idea of parallel universes came alive more than ever. Physicists like David Deutsch, Oxford, and Max Tegmark, MIT, not only acknowledged the possible existence of other universes, but began developing full mathematical frameworks to describe how they might operate. Max Tegmark even classified the multiverse into 4 levels, from level 1, regions of space too far away to ever be observed, to level 4, where every imaginable mathematical structure exists as its own distinct reality. Meanwhile, pop culture, from Hollywood to Netflix, quickly latched onto the idea as fertile ground for storytelling. From The Matrix, Inception, Stranger Things, to the more recent Everything Everywhere All at Once. American audiences weren't just being entertained. They were gradually being introduced to the idea that there might be countless versions of you out there. But the question still lingers. Is this pure imagination, or is it our unconscious way of preparing for a bigger truth? On a deeper level, the multiverse theory threatens the very foundations of philosophy and personal belief held by millions. If every action we take creates countless realities, then is destiny even a fixed thing anymore? If every outcome occurs, then what does personal responsibility even mean? And, more seriously, could we accidentally slip out of our original reality without even knowing it? I can't help but think back to that accident, and to the strange disorientation that lasted for months afterward. Maybe it was just a mild concussion, or maybe that was the moment I fell out of one reality and stepped into a completely different universe. A universe where I, James Walker, was beginning a journey no one ever dared believe was real. When I decided to pursue the question, do we have duplicates in parallel universes? I knew I couldn't do it alone, at least not if I wanted to get anywhere close to the truth. I started by looking into the top scientific institutions that had published research on the multiverse. And before long, a list emerged. At the top, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, where Professor Max Tegmark had become a standout name with his 4-tier model of the multiverse. He's not your average scientist. He's the kind of person who can make bold claims like every mathematical equation exists as its own independent reality, and still be respected by the scientific community. Next came Caltech, where Professor Sean Carroll didn't hesitate to say that the many worlds interpretation is serious science. He once appeared on Joe Rogan's podcast, and I remember the chill that ran down my spine when I heard him say, "We don't have proof that parallel worlds exist, but we also have no reason to think they don't." I started to realize What I once dismissed as a fringe conspiracy theory was now being seriously considered by some of the brightest minds in America. But what's even more fascinating is, not everything related to the multiverse is coming out of university lecture halls or high-tech labs. There are actual places, right here in the US, where people claim to have slipped out of reality. One of the most well-known is Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, where for decades, people have reported bizarre phenomena. Lights that move in defiance of physical laws, watches that stop working for several seconds and then resume as if nothing happened. A man named Robert Bigelow, an aerospace billionaire and former NASA contractor, bought the ranch for the sole purpose of investigating these unexplained anomalies. He's not the type to believe in ghosts. He's an investor, and he poured millions of dollars into trying to understand what's going on out there. Then there's Corridor 14, a stretch of highway in Arizona where dozens of drivers claim to have driven into another reality for a few minutes. Witnesses describe seeing altered landscapes, the color of the sky, the way light reflects, even traffic signs, didn't match what they knew. Some even claimed their watches were missing between 7 and 13 minutes, like time had been torn out and badly stitched back together. I reached out to some of these witnesses through Reddit threads and networks of paranormal podcasts. A man in Boise, Idaho, named Marcus, told me that while hunting, he entered a zone of silence. No birds, no wind, not even the sound of his own footsteps. When he came back out, his watch read 3:42 p.m., but the sun had almost completely set. His GPS had no record of the path he'd just taken. Sounds crazy, I know, but I couldn't ignore the number of people telling similar stories in different states at different times, but with the same repeating factor, a moment where the world felt off. And then, there's one more major player I can't leave out, DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. They've long been accused of funding programs involving reality manipulation, research into bendable space-time, and even simulating human brains to transmit data across dimensional boundaries. The documents about these projects, if they weren't destroyed, were all classified as top secret. I filed a FOIA request, the Freedom of Information Act, a citizen's right to request documents from the government. The response? Mostly blacked out pages, just dates and a few cryptic phrases. Some parts were so redacted you couldn't tell if they were talking about science or mythology. That's when I started asking tougher questions. If the government is spending money to research the possibility of parallel universes, does that mean they know something we've never been told? And there's something else. Stories from everyday people like me, like you, seem to be growing in number, but instead of being heard, they're dismissed. They're called crazy, over-imaginative. But I don't believe that's a coincidence. I believe there's a bigger picture. And if we want to piece it all together, we have to be willing to step into places where ordinary logic can no longer explain what's going on. Sitting in the quiet of my room in Denver, I started pinning maps, organizational charts, satellite images, and handwritten notes to a massive wall. Red string connecting different points, like something out of a Netflix investigative docuseries. But this is real, and I can't deny it. The model I'm building is starting to take shape. First point, witnesses who've experienced reality shifts are showing up in different states, but they tend to cluster around areas with strong geomagnetic fields or near former military bases. Coincidence? Maybe, but maybe not. Simple logic tells me, if enough people describe the same phenomenon and they don't know each other, you can't just dismiss it with the phrase mass hallucination. This isn't just one or two weird stories anymore. This is a repeating pattern. Second point, selective silence from the government. I'm not saying they're directly covering up the truth, but I know how the system works. If something poses a risk to social order or national strategic interests, the default response is to mark it classified. We've seen this in numerous declassified files, from the MKUltra experiments to the recent UAP documents released by the Pentagon after years of denial. So what if they've discovered a reality intersection, a tear in space-time? The first thing they do wouldn't be to hold a press conference. It would be to set up barriers, declare a no-fly zone, and assemble a specialized research team. And that wouldn't even be illegal. It'd fall under national security. Now let's talk about psychology for a minute. When I interviewed witnesses, almost all of them went through a crisis of belief. "I used to believe everything had order," said a woman in New Mexico, "until the day I walked out of the supermarket and the street was different. Same street name, same license plates, but the bridge was gone. And the friend I was with swore we hadn't gone anywhere." This is known as cognitive dissonance. When you face something that your current mental framework can't explain, you're forced to either adjust your beliefs or spiral into panic. And this is where conspiracy models usually emerge. I don't use the word conspiracy negatively. I use it in its literal sense. A coordinated effort to keep something bigger secret. In this case, if you believe that parallel realities exist, and that some people can accidentally slip into them, then what happens if the government or some private group is quietly studying it? You can call them the deep state, or a private entity with massive technological power, like AI megacorporations or defense contractors. The name isn't the important part. The motive is, if someone finds a way to move between realities, the first to control that technology gets to reshape history. They could erase disasters, restart wars, or simply pick a timeline where they always win. The world would no longer be a chain of cause and effect. It would be a cosmic menu where you choose your outcome first and then jump to the reality that fits your goal. Sounds insane? Maybe. But remember, we're living in an age where AI can write music, clone voices, and replicate your face with just a few lines of code. Technology is collapsing the boundary between science and science fiction, and the only limit left is ethics. A physicist once asked me, "If you stood in front of a door to a parallel universe, would you open it?" Back then, I laughed it off, dodged the question. But now I'm not so sure. I don't know if I've already stepped through such a door by accident. But I'm certain of one thing, someone somewhere already has. And they never came back. I still remember that day clearly. The day everything crossed the line between what I could believe and what I could no longer ignore. It was a Saturday morning in Colorado Springs. I was interviewing a former engineer named Daniel L., who had worked for a defense contractor with ties to DARPA. He looked exhausted, voice raspy from cigarettes and sleepless nights, but in his eyes was something I can't describe, like he had seen something that defied logic and reality itself. "I used to think only crazy people talked about the multiverse," Daniel began, "until 2013. According to him, he had been assigned to a project codenamed Project Threshold. The goal? To create an artificial magnetic field capable of bending spacetime within a confined area. The experiments took place at an underground facility in New Mexico. Everything was disguised under the label of high-frequency resonance research. The first time the machine powered up," Daniel said, "every clock in the room stopped for exactly 11 seconds. But the strange part wasn't that time froze. It was that all the clocks were out of sync when they restarted. It was like every corner of the room had experienced a different beat of time. I went silent." He went on to say that during the final test, when the frequency peaked at 43.2 Hz, one of the technicians stepped into the testing chamber before the device was fully powered down. He vanished, completely, without a trace. All the cameras glitched out, and the recordings turned into nothing but static. No one, not even the military, could explain it. And 3 days later, the device was dismantled. The project shut down. "He didn't die." Daniel looked straight at me. "I don't believe that. I think he just isn't here anymore. You might think I got conned. Maybe Daniel's just another eccentric. But there's one detail I can't shake. The date he said it all happened. July 2013. Around the same time, a report from NOAA's Geomagnetic Alert System recorded an unprecedented magnetic field disturbance, lasting 4 minutes, in southern New Mexico. That data is real. I found it in a public data archive. At that moment, I felt like all the puzzle pieces were circling around some invisible focal point. I began to entertain a bold hypothesis. If every human action creates a new branch of reality, as the many worlds theory suggests, what happens if there are physical locations where the barrier between realities is thinner than usual? Could those locations function as reality junctions? Places where, whether by accident or design, the veil can be pierced. And the crazier thought, What if certain organizations have already discovered those junctions and are quietly exploiting them? That's no longer just theory. That's a weapon, a chance to rewrite or to cover up mistakes. I went back and reviewed files on unsolved missing persons cases in the US. And there was one number that chilled me. Over 600,000 people are reported missing each year, and around 4,400 unidentified bodies are found annually. While most of those cases can be explained by crime, accidents, or runaways, a small percentage fall completely outside any normal pattern. And then I realized this hypothesis might not just be a mental exercise. It could be the answer behind thousands of tragedies that were never explained. That's when I stopped feeling like I was chasing a scientific question, and more like I was tracing a crack that's spreading through the wall of reality. And if it blows wide open, we won't just be facing alternate versions of ourselves from another world. We'll be forced to ask, what if that version wants to take our place? If there's one thing America does better than any country on earth, it's controlling information. Legally. We believe in freedom of the press, but we also have the National Security Act. We believe in the right to know, but we also allow the government to slap a top-secret label on anything it deems sensitive. And when things like parallel universes start showing signs of being real, the first reaction isn't transparency. It's silence. When I submitted a Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, request about Project Threshold, the response I received from the Department of Defense was a short letter stating that no documents matching the request description could be located. I wasn't surprised. But a few days later, my email inbox started receiving anonymous messages. Not threatening, not aggressive, just polite, but ice-cold warnings. Some secrets aren't kept to protect the government, but to protect public sanity. You're digging too deep. Sometimes knowing less is safer. I've never publicly posted my home address, but I know the internet has no real walls. One night, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street from my house. No front license plate. I'm not jumping to conclusions, but I felt what people call the invisible pressure of the system. Meanwhile, major media outlets were unusually quiet. I sent the recorded interview with Daniel to 3 major networks, NBC, CNN, and a prominent science magazine. The results? 2 didn't respond. The magazine replied that the content does not align with our editorial direction. That's a polite way of saying, we don't want to touch this. But what caught my attention wasn't just the silence. It was what they chose to report instead. Just weeks after I began publishing data on a personal blog, a flood of articles started showing up about the rise in mass hallucinations, psychological impacts of the pandemic, and especially the dangers of internet misinformation. Some outlets even interviewed psychologists who emphasized that belief in parallel universes may be a symptom of acute stress or obsessive delusions. I couldn't help but notice the timing. Instead of refuting the actual data, they redirected public opinion by undermining the credibility of anyone brave enough to ask questions. That's a classic tactic in crisis media management. Don't debate the information. Debate the person sharing the information. And then came the psychological play from the FBI. A former agent, who asked to remain anonymous, once told me, they don't have to arrest anyone. All they need to do is make you believe you're being watched. Most people will stop on their own. I started asking the bigger question. If the US government, a democratic system, can so easily sideline a topic like multiverse theory from the public's radar, how dangerous must this topic really be? America prides itself on scientific curiosity. We invest billions in NASA, fund CERN, build particle accelerators, and decode gravitational waves. So why, when faced with a phenomenon that could validate the theory of parallel universes, do all the research gates suddenly slam shut? I have a theory. Maybe the government already knows. Not just knows, but has been secretly experimenting. And instead of going public, they chose to silently control the narrative. Because if the public realized there might be countless versions of themselves living entirely different lives, then every concept of identity, law, ownership, and even faith would collapse. Imagine this. What if in another reality you are a criminal? What if a version of you from a parallel world slipped into this one and doesn't want to go back? That's no longer just a science story. That's a national security issue. And in a world like that, truth is no longer something everyone has the right to know. It becomes a strategic asset, held only by those powerful enough to decide who gets to hear it and who must stay silent. After months of gathering data, speaking with witnesses, cross-referencing scientific papers, and chasing every tiny lead, I've reached a point where all paths lead to the same question. If parallel universes really exist, what does that mean for us, for the life we're living, and for the world we thought was the only one? When I started this journey, I was just an average American, James Walker, who used to believe reality was clear, solid, and unshakable. Controversy. Every action leads to a single consequence. Every choice is unique. Every person walks only one path. But now, the parallel universe theory is no longer just a fictional tale like Stranger Things or Doctor Strange. It's become a lens, a completely different way to view reality, not as a straight line, but as an infinite branching web where every possibility is realized, somewhere. What's notable is that scientists no longer outright dismiss this theory. The debate now centers around whether it can be tested. But just because something can't be measured doesn't mean it isn't real. Gravitational waves were once only a theory in Einstein's mind, until technology caught up and we finally heard the echo from two black holes colliding billions of years ago. So what about the echo of another reality? Another world? Could it be reverberating through the strange dreams we can't remember? In that eerie feeling of déjà vu when you set foot somewhere you've never been? Or in those tiny, infinitesimal discrepancies that no one else notices but you? Maybe we've already gone astray, and no one knows. If a version of you exists out there, then which one of you is the original? If you live in a reality where all your choices were wrong, while another version of you is happy, successful, complete, would you trade places? But wait, what if they want the same thing? Could there be conflict between versions? A forced swap? This isn't just a philosophical musing anymore. It's an existential threat. The American legal system, the Constitution, the identity infrastructure, everything is built on a fundamental assumption. There's only one you. One person, one identity, one life that can be traced and verified. But if an alternate you were to step through a door between realities, do you think that system could handle the shock? No. Everything would fall apart. Insurance policies wouldn't apply. The justice system couldn't determine personal responsibility. And socially, psychologically, our collective belief in a single world, something that has grounded us for thousands of years, would be shaken to its core. Maybe that's why the government is silent. Not because they're evil or deceitful, but because they have no idea how to tell us the truth without tearing everything down. I won't claim to have the answers. I don't know if Project Threshold is real. I'm not even sure the people I've interviewed were telling the truth. But I do know this feeling is real. The feeling that something in this world doesn't add up. The feeling that I've been somewhere else. The feeling that one day I'll meet myself, stepping out from another place. And when that day comes, I don't know if I should say hello or run. That day, I made a decision I never thought I'd make. I wasn't just a researcher anymore. I was a seeker of truth, even if it meant destroying everything I once believed in. I couldn't keep living with these questions echoing in my head. I had to find answers, no matter what they were. At dawn, as sunlight crept through the blinds, I began packing for the journey. I didn't know where I was headed, but I knew I had to go. I left my office, packed away critical documents and electronics in my backpack. That was all I needed. A laptop, some files, and a camera to document whatever I might find. Everything else felt fragile and meaningless in the face of such a massive question. My first destination wasn't a lab or a library. I couldn't trust public documents anymore. I had to search in places where the real information was hidden, where the stories about the multiverse were being quietly managed. My destination, San Luis County, New Mexico. I had received a few indirect tips about strange phenomena occurring near a heavily guarded military zone. When I arrived, I had only a vague sense of unease. Everything looked normal, small houses, vast fields, and the dry air of the American West. But I could feel something, an unexplainable event, unfolding behind invisible walls. Conversations at the local cafes didn't help. People there seemed oblivious to any secret experiments, magnetic devices, or strange occurrences. But when I stopped by a vintage physics shop, one man recognized me. He didn't know who I was, but his eyes said it all. He had heard of me. And maybe he knew what I was looking for. "Whatever you find won't be what you expect," he said, his voice cold and deep. "There are places you can't go, stories you can't know. But if you still want to go, I'll show you where to begin." He handed me a piece of paper with an address and a name. Dr. Avery Lawson, a well-known figure in theoretical physics, rumored to have worked on space-time experiments. I recognized the name from a few obscure documents I had come across, but I had never been able to contact him through official channels. I didn't have much time to think. Dr. Lawson was a critical piece of the puzzle, and if I didn't meet him, I would forever be someone chasing something I didn't understand. I began the journey to find him. A secret location deep in the woods near Los Alamos, New Mexico. What I didn't expect was that along the way, I'd face more than just the suspicion of the locals. I began to notice strange traces in the places I passed. Abandoned buildings with shattered windows, barren plots of land showing signs of heavy equipment, and a strange sensation, as if a door had opened, but I couldn't walk through it. That night, as I stood before a small house at the edge of the forest, I felt a suffocating isolation. The New Mexico sky turned dark and hazy, and I wondered if I was still on the right path. I looked up at the stars above, but the peace they once brought me was gone. When I knocked on Dr. Lawson's door, I had no idea how he would receive me, but I knew one thing. I had started a journey with no way back. I had crossed a threshold invisible to the eye, yet one that led me into another world. The wooden door of the old house creaked open, and I saw an elderly man with silver hair and piercing eyes that looked like they'd seen far too much in a lifetime. He didn't seem surprised to see me. It was as if he already knew I was coming. There was no warm welcome, just a slight nod and a brief statement. "You're right on time." I followed him inside the house, where thick shelves of books towered over vintage computers humming at full power. The air was heavy, filled with the scent of aged paper, the smell of research long buried in the dark. Dr. Lawson sat at his desk, eyeing me cautiously before speaking. "In physics, we work with hypotheses, but not all of them can be tested right away. Some can only be proven once humanity reaches a deeper understanding of itself and of the universe." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the man I had been searching for, Dr. Lawson, a former researcher in classified government programs, rumored to be part of Project Threshold, and someone who understood better than anyone else what I had come to find. "My work isn't just about studying observable phenomena in this universe," he continued, his cold gaze fixed on me. "I've been studying the interactions between parallel realities. I know you're looking for answers, and I also know you're not the only one. But there's something you need to understand before you go any further." He paused for a moment, as if weighing whether or not to speak the next words. "We can't tell the world what we've discovered, not because we don't want to, but because the truth could collapse the entire foundation of society." I couldn't suppress my curiosity. But if parallel universes really exist, why hide it? Why not tell people the truth? Dr. Lawson sighed, his expression growing more reflective. "That's not a simple question to answer. Before you can understand why we stay silent, you have to grasp that each parallel universe isn't just a duplicate of this one. They may differ radically, in physical laws, in the flow of time, even in moral frameworks." He stood up and moved toward a tall bookshelf in the corner of the room. After rummaging for a moment, he pulled out an old, worn notebook. The pages had faded with time. "This is the result of years of research. What you're looking for, not all of it is within our understanding." He handed me the notebook. Every page was filled with symbols, complex mathematical formulas, and diagrams I couldn't immediately comprehend. But one thing stood out: drawings of parallel universes. Parallel universes are not just theoretical. They exist, and we can reach them, not through technology, but by altering our own perception, Dr. Lawson said. "But there's a catch. These universes are not perfect replicas. Some may differ only slightly. Others might be so drastically different that returning becomes impossible. My heart pounded. This wasn't just theory. This was a hidden reality. And if it was true, I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't turn away from. Dr. Lawson looked at me, and in his eyes I saw concern, as if he too knew the weight of what this truth could mean. If you continue down this path, you will no longer be yourself. You won't just discover other universes. You'll face decisions that even I haven't dared to make. I tried to steady my voice. So what should I do next? What happens if I keep going? He looked at me again. This time, his gaze wasn't just a warning. It was a reminder. You'll come to realize everything you thought was reality may just be a tiny part of something far bigger. And once you see that, there's no going back. I sat there in the dim room, the only light coming from a weak desk lamp illuminating the pages he'd given me. The feeling in that moment wasn't curiosity. It was fear, uncertainty, and a quiet sense of dread. I knew then there was no turning back. After learning that parallel universes weren't just a theory, but a reachable truth, I realized I had already crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Dr. Lawson had warned me, if you continue, you won't see the world the same way again. At first, I thought that was just the cryptic warning of an experienced man. But now, sitting in that room, I felt the full weight of what he meant. It was a truth I couldn't deny, and one I wasn't sure I could live with. I stood up and stepped outside. The night sky over New Mexico was unusually still. I could hear the wind rustling through the trees, and it felt like the whole world had slowed down, waiting for me to make a choice. Keep going or stop here. If I kept going, I would be forced to confront questions society had never prepared me for. I'd have to accept that what I once called reality might be only a sliver of a vast, uncontrollable whole. Parallel universes weren't just abstract theories. They could be colliding realities with unpredictable consequences. I remembered what Dr. Lawson had said. You won't be yourself anymore. I used to think I understood this world. I thought everything had an explanation, that with enough knowledge, I could make sense of it all. But now I saw how fragile everything really was. One wrong move, one impulsive choice, could ripple across the universe in ways I couldn't even imagine. And if I stepped into another world, maybe I wouldn't come back. Encounter myself, someone entirely different, a version of me living in another reality. Could I accept that? I'd spent so long searching for answers, but the biggest question now wasn't, do parallel universes exist? It was, am I ready to face what happens if I learn they do? Not everyone can do that. I'm not a soldier or a scientist trained to withstand earth-shattering truths. And if I choose to go forward, there's no going back to the life I knew. I won't be able to look at my relationships, my work, or even myself with the same innocent perspective again. But a part of me, the part that's always been curious, the part that can't stand unanswered questions, had already decided I couldn't give up. I stepped out of Dr. Lawson's house with a new determination, knowing full well the road ahead was unclear. My hands clenched tightly around the materials he had given me, and one question echoed in my mind. If I don't do this, can I live with myself? Parallel universes might be terrifying, but they could also be an opportunity to understand myself and the world more deeply. Maybe even a chance to change my own fate. There was no turning back. Every choice now would lead me into a world I had never set foot in, and I had no idea if I could survive it. But I had made my choice, and I couldn't go back. After leaving Dr. Lawson's house, I had no idea where to go next. Confusion and disorientation weighed heavily on me, but the determination to keep going had taken hold of my mind. There was no retreat. I had to keep learning about the parallel universes, even if it meant losing everything I had once believed in. I decided to leave New Mexico and drive north, toward a place I had only heard about in stories told by scientists and researchers. Monument Valley, famous for its towering red rock formations and breathtaking landscapes. But the place held a mystery few people spoke of, especially concerning unexplained phenomena. The trip took nearly a full day, and during that time, I began to feel something strange. First, there were odd sounds coming from the car radio. At first, I thought it was just a weak signal, but even after I stopped the car and tried again, the sounds remained. A faint echo, as if someone were speaking through a distant ham radio station, but the words were unintelligible. I switched through different channels, but nothing changed. It didn't seem like a technical glitch. I decided to ignore it and kept driving. But then another strange thing happened as I crossed a small bridge over a shallow creek. Suddenly, I saw a strange light glowing from beneath the ground, like a door opening from another world. It wasn't sunlight or headlights. It was a soft, bluish hue, as if it reflected from an invisible source. I couldn't explain it, nor could I resist the urge to stop and investigate. I stepped out of the car and approached the creek. As I set foot on the rocky bank, a cold sensation rippled through my body, like space and time were being stretched around me. I looked around, trying to understand the source of the light. But there was nothing, just silence and emptiness. Then I heard a faint sound, like a footstep behind me. I turned, but saw no one. Still, something made my skin crawl. I felt a change in the air, subtle but undeniable, as if another world existed right alongside mine, just behind a thin veil. The footsteps echoed again, this time louder, closer. Then, a man stepped out from the shadows. He wore a long coat and a cap, and his eyes glowed with the same strange light I'd seen just moments earlier. "You're searching for answers," he said in a deep, knowing voice, as if he'd known me for a long time. I froze, unsure how to react. How did he know what I was looking for? And how had he appeared here, right at the moment I was feeling the shift in this space? "There are things science can't explain," he continued, as if reading my thoughts. "But we still have to face them. You've stepped into a realm not everyone can cross. If you want to understand, you'll need to follow the signs you're seeing." A strange feeling rose within me. This man clearly wasn't just some wanderer. He was connected to everything I'd been chasing. I tried to find the words to ask about the parallel universes, but he was already ahead of me. "Don't rush to ask for answers. Look around and let yourself feel what's happening," he said, then turned and vanished into the darkness. I stood there, stunned, unsure what to do next. What had just happened couldn't have been a coincidence. I'd heard stories of people who seemed to come from other worlds, and now I was face to face with one of them. But more importantly, I felt closer than ever to a truth I couldn't deny. I continued deeper into Monument Valley, increasingly aware of the strange shifts in the space around me. Unexplainable lights, mysterious sounds, and the appearance of that enigmatic man had proven to me that parallel universes weren't just a theory. This journey, I realized, was no longer about theoretical research. It had become an exploration of an entirely different reality, and I was stepping into it with no way back. The next morning, I woke up in a small cabin near Monument Valley. Even though I was still shaken by what had happened the night before, the strange feeling still lingered. The man I'd met in the dark, the ethereal glow from beneath the earth. I couldn't shake them from my mind. I knew I was getting close to the answers, even as more questions piled up. It wasn't all clear yet, but one thing was certain. Parallel universes weren't just a hypothesis. They were part of a truth I could no longer ignore, and I needed to go deeper. Things were getting more complicated, and I felt like I had no other choice. I was determined to step into a completely different world, and there was no turning back. After going through some old records at the local library, I started researching the strange phenomena reported in Monument Valley and the surrounding areas. I found an old article from the 1970s that mentioned local residents had once reported bizarre events in remote parts of the region, far away from the main roads. They spoke of strange lights and eerie sounds appearing regularly at night, sometimes even of blurry, shadow-like figures drifting by, as if they were from another world. What caught my attention most in that article was a strange story about a group of researchers who had come here in the late 60s. They were studying fluctuations in the electromagnetic field and anomalies in spatial structure, something that immediately reminded me of the phenomena I had experienced. These researchers never returned, and their work had been erased from the official records. This is the place I need to find, I told myself, not because I suspected they had discovered something, but because I believed they knew something. A truth they couldn't make public. I decided to search for the location where those researchers had once worked. After several hours of driving, I arrived at a remote area, barren except for towering rock formations and wild grasses. I parked the car and began hiking deeper into the landscape. The tall, jagged cliffs rose into the blue sky like walls guarding secrets buried deep beneath the earth. And then I found it. A massive boulder lay toppled near a ridge, covered in strange markings, engravings unlike anything I had ever seen. These weren't ancient symbols or decorative patterns. They looked like maps, like directions, but not in any language that made logical sense. They seemed more like diagrams of interdimensional gates, points of connection between alternate realities. I reached out and touched the surface of the stone. The sensation was eerie, as though I were interacting with something beyond the bounds of ordinary matter. As my fingers traced the carvings, a faint light flickered from within the rock, making me jolt back. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but the light was too deliberate to be a hallucination. It felt like a response, like the stone was aware of my presence. Suddenly, a cold wind swept over me. It wasn't strong, but it was chilling, as though the space around me was shifting. I looked up and that's when I saw it. A doorway, not made of wood or metal, but a translucent wall of stone, appeared before me. It glowed with a soft, pale light, the same kind I'd seen near the creek. It wasn't a physical object, but more like a tear in space, a portal. My rational mind wanted to reject what I was seeing, to believe this was just an illusion. But my heart knew better. This was what I had been searching for, a passageway, a path to a parallel world. I stared at the door, captivated by its presence. It didn't just feel like a doorway, it felt like a threshold between two realms. If I crossed it, I might find the answers I'd been chasing for so long. But would I dare to go through? I hesitated, clutching my camera tightly, as if it were the only thing anchoring me to my reality. My last chance to document what I was about to leave behind. The answer had come, but did I have the courage to cross this threshold and face the unimaginable? Looking at the stone door, I felt a strange pull. Even though my rational mind screamed for caution, my heart couldn't resist its allure. The doorway wasn't a solid structure. It had no sharp edges or clear outline. It was more like a fracture in reality, a place where this world and another overlapped. I couldn't explain why I felt such an urgent need to step through. Part of me wanted to turn back, to walk away and continue the search by more conventional means. But there was a voice inside me whispering that if I didn't cross this door, I would never truly understand the truth. My heart and mind battled each other, but in the end, my belief in this journey won. I took a deep breath and stepped across the threshold. Instantly, the space around me shifted. A wave of disorientation washed over me, as if I had passed through an invisible curtain. I didn't feel pain, but there was a strange transformation in the air. My body felt like it was being pushed forward while everything behind me twisted and faded away. The world I had just left behind bent and blurred, eventually dissolving from view. When I opened my eyes again, I was standing in an entirely different place. Gone were the red cliffs and fields of wild grass. I was now in a dense forest, but not like any forest I had ever seen. The trees were impossibly tall, their trunks pale gray, and their leaves glowed softly in the dark, like twinkling lights floating in shadow. The atmosphere carried an almost surreal hue, as if night and dawn were blending together. Every breath I took felt fresh and light, yet filled with an unfamiliar strangeness. The air here was unlike anything from the world I'd left. The scent of soil and fresh grass was mixed with something otherworldly, a smell I couldn't name. I looked around, searching for signs of life. Strange creatures moved through the shadows, figures that seemed to flicker between dimensions. They were blurry, yet somehow very real. I couldn't tell what they were, only that they were there, moving quickly and making sounds that were impossible to predict. Walking through this world, I felt like a stranger, lost in a place I couldn't understand. Everything felt different, from the way space curved to the way reality shifted with every step I took. I couldn't stop thinking about the stories I'd heard about parallel universes, where space and time weren't defined the way we know them. And now I was here in a world that might never be fully understood. Strangely, I wasn't afraid. Instead, I felt a sense of wonder, like I had stepped into an endless adventure. It was the same feeling I had as a child, discovering something magical for the first time. There was an overwhelming sense of curiosity inside me, an unshakable desire to know what this world would reveal. I began walking deeper into the forest, following the strange lights and shadows. Then, I heard something behind me, a soft, deliberate movement, like someone was approaching. I turned around, and this time I couldn't deny it. There was someone, coming toward me. It wasn't human, at least not in any way I understood what it meant to be human. Its shape was hazy, as if it were made of air, but there was a clear structure to it, like a thick, condensed cloud with long, star-like arms stretching out from its core, shimmering with light. It didn't speak, yet the glow it emitted felt like it was communicating with me, as if it knew who I was, and why I was here. We stood facing each other for what felt like a long time. No words exchanged, but I could sense a strange connection. I knew this wasn't a hostile entity. It was a being from another world, a parallel world. Suddenly, as if sensing the unease inside me, the creature extended one of its arms, and an image began to take shape in the space between us. It was a vision of a world similar to mine, but distinctly different. My first glimpse into a parallel reality, seen through the eyes of a being I couldn't comprehend. It didn't need to speak. The vision said everything. Even though I couldn't explain it, I stood there, frozen, staring at this strange creature. It didn't move to attack or even intimidate, but I was overwhelmed by a strange feeling, as if I were standing at the threshold of the universe's most hidden secrets. The being, with its hazy yet solid form, didn't speak a word. It just stood there, as though waiting for something. The vision it created still hovered in the air, vivid and lifelike. It showed a world that looked like mine, yet with stark differences. Buildings, streets, everything appeared familiar, but something about them was off. The scenery looked warped, the lines curved, as though they didn't belong in the three-dimensional space I was used to. I reached out, instinctively wanting to touch the image, but the moment my fingers brushed it, it evaporated into the air, vanishing into the space around me. Then I felt it. Something shifted. A cold breeze swept past me, and the creature began to move. Its long, star-like arms reached toward me. "Don't be afraid," a voice echoed inside my mind. Not a sound, but a thought, direct, undeniable. "We are not your enemies. We are part of something greater. A part of you." The message hit me like a wave. How could I understand this? Was I imagining the voice in my head? Or was this really happening? But the being didn't stop there. Continued to transmit more thoughts. "You are not alone. You may not know it, but you've lived through many realities. What you call memories may not be everything you've experienced. This universe and others are all interconnected. We didn't come to attack. We came to help you understand." The strangeness in my body deepened. This being wasn't just talking about parallel realities. It was making me realize something even more profound, that I wasn't alone in the cosmos. We, as humans, are just one part of a vast network, something I'd never imagined before. "Parallel universes are not mere copies," the voice continued. "We all exist in different spaces, but the connections between us are not random. You'll understand, if you look the right way." With each thought it sent me, I could feel a shift happening inside. Stories about alternate universes, things I once thought were just science fiction, now felt more real than ever. But there was one thing I couldn't grasp. Why me? Why had this creature chosen me to receive its message? There was a brief silence. Then another image appeared in the air. This time, not a still picture, but a living scene, full of movement. Roads twisting, buildings reshaping, and within it all I noticed a common thread. Each change was triggered by some shift in space and time. "We cannot survive in your world forever," the voice continued. "Your world and ours are beginning to overlap. If no one understands what's happening, these realities will begin to collide." A wave of anxiety rolled over me. Was I a part of something I had no control over? The feeling only grew stronger as I realized I might be standing at the edge of a fundamental shift in how the universe operates. Parallel realities may be unraveling, and I might be the only one who could truly perceive it. You are part of the plan, the voice added. Every human, every being in this universe has a role. Yours is not finished. You will have to choose. I stood there, frozen, thoughts racing in circles. This creature wasn't just talking about parallel worlds. It was hinting at something deeper. Maybe I wasn't ready to understand it all, but I knew I couldn't turn back now. I had to keep going. I had to find the truth. We will meet again, the voice echoed one last time. Prepare for what's coming.